I don't think about just giving out a mortgage. I really do feel like I want to create a good experience and like an education piece and really, go at it that way instead of being like, okay, this is my career, this is what I am, and this is all my identity is. It's really not true, and money shouldn't really define you.
Welcome to Small Acts of Rebellion, a podcast where the unspoken narratives at the intersection of our personal and professional lives come to light. I'm your host, Heather Pridemore, your guide on this journey of discovery and defiance. Join me as we uncover the rebellious spirit that shapes our careers and lives. It's time to own your story. Are you ready?
Today's guest is Christine Stirling, a mortgage loan officer with a passion for helping clients secure their dream homes. With over 7 years of experience at Fairway Independent Mortgage, Christine brings a wealth of knowledge, competitive rates, and an impressively quick loan process to the table. Before this, she sharpened her expertise at Mountain View Bank of Commerce and even managed multi-million-dollar branches during her decade-long tenure at JP Morgan Chase. When she's not working, Christine enjoys hiking, snowboarding, and embracing the Colorado lifestyle. Fun fact, she once grew a beet the size of her head and has completed 4 marathons. Welcome to the show, Christine.
Thank you, Heather. That is quite the introduction. I appreciate that.
Well, you are such a dynamic person, right? Not just like your career and everything. And I always like to say how I know the people who come on the show. And so you and I have actually known each other, let's see, I don't know, 4 or 5 years now. Christine was my broker when I bought my most recent home. And I was telling her the other day that for me, growing up blue collar and never really having much, and then sort of progressing through life and climbing the corporate ladder and having all the traditional markers of success that led me to be able to afford this beautiful home that I now live in, there was still that mindset about scarcity and uncertainty and maybe even some shame that I brought to the table when I first met Christine. And one of the things I really loved about getting to know Christine is honestly just how fucking cool she was and so supportive and just was like, girl, I'm going to help you make your dreams happen. Like, everything's going to be good. I mean, I still remember that phone call, Christine, when I was so trepidatious about telling you that I wanted that house and feeling so scared that you were going to, tell me I couldn't have it, that I didn't earn enough, or I wasn't good enough, or, all the things that we sort of tell ourselves in our heads. And I don't know, it just means a lot. So beyond just coming on the show, thank you for being so awesome and great at your job and such a cool person and all those things.
Thank you so much for that. Makes my day, because that is the most important thing. Is I love my job so much because of what you just said. I feel like I have zero judgments. And I hope that I get that in return in my life, which has really probably not been the case. But those are the things that, like, I never want somebody who I'm working with to feel like they're not getting the best from me in terms of just like, okay, what can you do? And don't freak out. I said that to somebody yesterday when I was talking to them. I could feel them going, oh my gosh, this is a huge deal. And I think one of the things is I never forget that. What is it like to be in your shoes? What's it like to buy your first house or be like, wow, I'm going to buy this X amount of dollar house and I'm scared. So I have a lot of compassion and empathy for people because I just never forget that. Every single time I do it over and over again, I talk to another new person that I've never met, and I think they're probably really worried about being judged because they only have this much money in their bank account. And that's a lot of what I've done in my life for my job, which is so odd because I don't know how you get into the money business. It's a weird place to end up. And I think you have to be a special person where you can separate any judgment of somebody and look at them in a different way of this is their hopes and dreams, and like I'm going to help them get that.
That's not, I don't know. My experience, Christine, is that is not always common, though, from people who work in things like, banking and like loans and anything really to do with, let's say, just like borrowing money. And because at the end of the day, we are all still just a set of like dollars and cents and credit scores and all these factors that get fed into the machine that say whether or not we are, and it's about risk, right? So like for those listening, even though you are being judged, right?
Yes.
There is what the banks are really trying to figure out often is just like risk, right? Like how much risk are they willing to take on? And as I know, and I'm sure plenty of people listening know, that isn't always the best representation of a situation, right? Because banks don't always look at certain factors, or like, certain things don't always come into play. But I just think it's cool of you to have also in consideration that human element, because at the end of the day, we are human, right? And so, yes, we are credit scores and dollars and cents and how much we make and what's in our bank account and all of those things, but we are also people. And I don't know, maybe I'm a little jaded, but I just don't feel like I see that from a lot of people who work in what I'd call money industries.
Yeah. And I think, you know, I know this is fun because the listeners hopefully are just going to say, okay, Christine, you're silly, but it is a male dominated industry. And I'm not saying that there aren't really great male bankers and people who do have compassion, but I think as a woman, I do feel that it's empathy, compassion, feelings, and emotions that I'm okay with to feel for my customer and really just vibe on that. And I think sometimes that's probably why we don't see that a lot in finance. And I have been in finance for over 20 years, and I know there's a lot of men in the industry. And so sometimes I think it is dollars and figures. And that is part of, a lot of sales jobs, anyways, as you know, because you are in a very professional sales job as well. So it's that part of it you cannot deny. We do look at guidelines. We have to follow guidelines so everybody's treated equal. In my mind, I look at that like a puzzle. So when I'm looking at somebody's situation, it's not just, oh, you have $5,000. It's the whole picture and how does it fit into the guidelines? And mostly so that we can make sure that you can afford your life. And that would be the worst thing ever. So yeah, this is a thing that I feel like I have grown and changed and really become somebody who does give a shit about everybody that comes my way. And I think that's just so important. So thank you for saying that, because I do want to be a unique unicorn out there. That's really wonderful. And not because that's just, I guess, what happens if you try and just be authentic. And that is not something you find in sales a lot of times. So you're right. I am in the same boat where I've come across that with people that are in my same industry right now doing mortgages, let's say, that I can't believe some of the things they say and do when they're communicating with their clients. So I'm just trying to be better every day of my life and better to people. The older I get, the more that's just really so important to me.
Clearly, Christine, we're gonna talk about something that a lot of people consider a bit taboo, and money is such an interesting one. I think especially for women, right? There's so much, I don't know, reservation or maybe uncertainty about what the etiquette is when you talk about money. And yet at the same time, women recognize the fact that if we don't talk to each other about money, then we're never going to collectively increase our knowledge, our impact, our exposure. But you work in money, and so someone once said something funny to me. I was still in the automotive industry at the time, and they said, when you work in automotive, like, you deal in automotive, for example, you have fancy cars, you're buying and selling cars, like, you get the business, and so it's something that kind of seeps into your personal life. And they said, but people who work in money, that's what they deal in, is money. And so, and I know where our conversation is going, and I just wanted to share that little bit of anecdotal information with you. But what I really want to know is that, as someone who works in money, how has that shaped your perspective on what money represents, right? So thinking beyond just the means of exchange, how do you ultimately define the value of money in your personal and your professional life? So I guess what I'm asking, Christine, is, are you just sowing and growing and making all kinds of dough? You're like Scrooge McDuck diving into piles of cash because that's the industry you work in? Or like, how has money sort of, like, what kind of meaning does it take in your life?
I just love this topic of conversation, and I hope the listeners do too, because I want you to know that I will be very honest, as I think that's the only unfortunate way. And my answer is a blessing and a curse in so many ways. And I want to put a pin in something that you said that's really important about women talking about money and just like the shame of that at some point, because I think that's a really cool topic as well. But my perspective on the value of money, less just an exchange, has really ebbed and flowed in my life. I've hated the industry and then I've loved the industry. When I was a bank manager, And that job was so interesting because people would walk in and they would go, I need to see the bank manager. And they would be all mad. And I'd be like, oh, it's me. And I think they just like became disarmed. And I really love that job because I love talking to people. I talk to 25 different people a day, sit in my office, have a conversation. And I love that. But money does sometimes bring out the worst in people and the worst in families. And I've watched people fight over money, and I've watched, it's really interesting how I ended up in that space. But I think what it was is that each person had a different story. So money affects everything. And I hate to say that because I don't really care that much about money. I feel like in my personal life, it's not a focus of mine. But people, it really can emotionally change the scene in a second. So as the manager of the bank, I felt like someone would come in yelling at me, and I'm not going to waive their fees, people. I'm sorry. Be nice. It's very simple. But if someone was really cool and they explained their story, maybe I would waive their fee for them and listen to everything that everybody said, whether they're yelling at me or not. But it really can be a curse. On the flip side, in my professional life too, it's been a blessing because right now I'm doing something a little bit more specific. So when you're a bank manager, you do all the things, you count the money, you maybe tell her one day, but now I'm just doing loans. So I'm going to more of an expertise, which I think is really good for me and something that I really wanted to do after being at the bank for 11 years. I'm like, I really want to do something specific. So professionally, it's awesome because now I'm lending money. So now I'm giving people money instead of them bringing it to me and them counting their bucks and, oh my gosh, I got this fee or whatever. It's more like I am helping someone to get a loan so they can buy a house for their family. And it's just, so it ebbs and flows for me. I've loved it and I've hated it.
What about for you personally? You said that money's not a big motivator for you. And I relate, Christine. I see money as more of a means to an end. And I also have learned through being a kind of more on the have not side of the equation to more of the have over the years, that there is sort of these interesting tipping points with money where, you know, once you sort of take care of the necessities and you start to have disposable income, that, I mean, it is a little bit of a mind fuck. I mean, I don't know if other people have experienced this or felt this way, but for me, growing up where money was always scarce and it was like, okay, let's make ends meet, let's stretch every dollar. Like we couldn't do certain things. Like some Christmases were full of gifts while other Christmases we didn't have very much, you know? And so like I've experienced sort of that end of the financial spectrum. And then I got to fancy corporate job and like, you know, climbing the corporate ladder and all of the sort of perks and resources that come with a job like that. And I thought, oh, great. Now I'm taking a couple of vacations a year and I don't have to think twice when I buy something at the store because I know I have a certain level of disposable income. And then what's even more interesting is that there was even aspects of money that became a little bit like almost like monopoly money. And I don't want to downplay the importance of money, but I will say this, that in my experience, that when you get to a certain point and you start learning a bit more about things like, I don't know, investments and the such, all of a sudden money almost starts to feel even like conceptual, right? Like it's not like a real thing anymore.
Yes. So I am with you. When I grew up, you know, my parents worked really, really hard and we did have things, but I wouldn't say that we lived any bougie lifestyle. I lived out in the woods in Michigan. My dad is an engineer, super smart. My mom worked for an accounting firm and had lots of jobs. I mean, they always worked. So for me, even as a young person, you know, the value of money was like, you better work hard for that, Christine. And I love that about my upbringing. Honestly, it was hard. I feel like it was that was difficult, but it really made me realize the value of the dollar. So I would say I've been in that space where I found myself right when I started working at the bank, I'm making $30,000 a year salary, and that's it, that I had to work at the bar to pay my bills as well as work as a bank manager. That's crazy, right? But I had two jobs for 5 years because somehow at that point when I started that job at the bank, I had $30,000 of credit card debt. And that happened because I had a boyfriend that lived with me and like he was spending money and it just happened. Life happens. It's so interesting, right? And I found that to be really tough space in my life where I didn't have any money and I was having to work 43 days straight without a day off so that I could pay bills. And so I'm with you where it's like I have been in both spaces where then, okay, I was like, I'm going to keep going at this job, pursue my career. You know, I don't have any kids, so my career has been a big part of my life. And it's always been in money. So when I said before that I didn't really care about it, what I mean by that is I'm pretty conservative. Like I don't go out and spend a lot of money except on other people, which is good and bad. But so from a personal perspective for me, I've had money and I've not had money. So that's why I think I have so much empathy for other people, because I have been in all the places, really, truly. And now I feel like in the last, 15 years, my career has been pretty awesome. I feel like I've kicked some ass. I have had the best customer service scores and all kinds of cool stuff that made me so happy. And I felt like I was really accomplished. And that feels good. So I think money can make you feel good and it can make you feel really bad.
So I want to pivot a little bit, Christine, because I want to talk about success, right? So we're talking about money, which is typically a pretty standard traditional marker of like, the more money I make, the more successful that I am. And you and I recently had a really nice conversation about self-defining success. And we talked about things like identity and work entanglement. And so I'm just wanting you to share a little bit of your insights, the ones that you've gained as you've kind of gone on this journey of self-defining success on your own terms and going through that process of sort of disentangling who you are from what you do, because you just said like my career has been a big part of who I am. And so I'm just curious like what that journey's been like from you, or like what that journey's been like for you and where you are now on that journey.
Yes, that is such a good question. I think the beginning of my answer for that is a story of when I wanted to quit at the bank because I was so stressed out. I did not love my job anymore. And I thought, this has been my career for 11 years. Do I have to keep doing this? Could I even do anything else? Am I stuck in the bank for the rest of my life? And why wouldn't I be? I made a good salary. I worked hard. I had, lots of accolades, and it just wasn't for me anymore. But that was who I was. If anybody ever asked me, "Oh, what do you do?" Well, I work as a bank manager. I'm some hot shit. I think that's really how I came off, which is odd to think about now. But at that point, I said, I don't think that's who I am. And I loved the communication and the people piece. So I did not want to leave that part where I was like, hey, I get to sit with people and talk to them about serious stuff and like their money and earn their trust and like give them good advice and all this cool stuff. But the stress of the job, I was like going to Walgreens, eating like 20 lavender pills a day because I was like, had so much anxiety. And I thought, I don't want to do this anymore. So one day I decided to resign. It was Friday the 13th, which is one of my favorite days, just so everybody knows out there. And I said I quit. That was the craziest thing I've ever done. As a person who, had a really successful career at that point, just to say I have to quit this because of my health and my mental well-being. And that's really why I did it, because I loved the job, but I just couldn't do it anymore. So I quit. And that part of my life was hard or interesting, as your question is to answer it. Wow, when someone asked me what I did, I had nothing to say. And then I thought, well, that better change. Maybe I should change that. And I went and took 7 months off. I traveled the world. I went and did all kinds of crazy shit. And it was so fun. And thank gosh that I got that opportunity for myself though. So, it's hard. I know some people work so hard and you don't get a chance to take off. But at that point I had sacrificed a lot of my life for that job. And I thought, I'm going to take some time off no matter what it takes. And I didn't spend a lot of money when I did that, but I did travel and go and stay in hostels for $12 and whatever. And I'm so happy that I did that, because that really helped me to realize that your job and money and how much you make is like means really zero. So that's kind of how that became, where I was like, I'm going to recreate myself. And how I got back into mortgages was somebody at my previous company kept saying, hey, you should come try this. I'll teach you everything, because you don't normally just walk into a lender job and say, hey, I'm just going to become a lender, because it's really complicated. It's high stakes. So he taught me everything and I went into lending, and I don't ever, I know that's what my job is, but I wouldn't say that if someone asked me what I do, that's probably the first thing that I say anymore, but I used to. So,
So what do you do now, Christine? Because I have to say, like, as someone who has had, let's call them epiphanies at various points in my life where you sort of get this moment of realization that like what you do and who you are sort of these separate but like related things. And you go through the process of having this like insight, but then you get back into the habits of, right, like your daily life, your work life, all these things. Like there's sort of a certain flow to work and life that kind of suck you back in and almost sometimes negates the lessons that life has presented. And so I'm just curious, like, how have you held on to that insight? Like, how have you held on to that ability to keep your identity sort of as a separate component from like what you do?
a lot of crying, therapy, hard work every day to just remember that part of it, because you're so right. I mean, you could not be more right about what you just said in my mind, because some days I'm like, how did I get back into this finance job? I thought I quit that once. I like, I did it and now I'm back in it. So I think it's wonderful. My life personally right now, I'm trying to take it every day, one day at a time, be super present, because this is where I've ended up. This is my job. And I feel like I want to be really good at it. And when it's over, then I'll be done with this. But right now I feel like I'm doing a lot of good, and that means a lot to me. And it just happens to be that I've been in the money field. And it's so funny because, you know, when I was working in the bank and I had to wear a suit, I would always cover up all my tattoos so that the customers couldn't see that I was like a tatted up bank manager or whatever. And, now I just don't really care anymore. So there's a lot of like growth that came along, and yes, I forget sometimes. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm working like 20 hours a day. Why am I doing that? So yeah, you have to like always be, if you can be present, I think that really helps. That's what I try to do. I mean, I by no means perfect at that because it's impossible, but I think that's I think it's really important to just remember where you came from, right?
I want to kind of go back to something you said a little bit ago, Christine, because I think this ties to this concept of like having your identity be separate from your work. And so earlier you were talking about how when you spend money, you like to spend it on other people. And one aspect of your identity that I know that's sort of outside of the scope of like what you do is that you like to entertain. And I'm just curious, what role do you think like things like joy and fun have played in, the relationships and the communities that we build? And then what do you think drives you to want to create those experiences for others?
Well, I'm a small child in an adult's body, so I like to have fun. Yes, that is very true. I like to be silly, and it makes me happy to make other people laugh. When I had quit my job, I went to a psychic and she told me she thought that I should be a comedian. And I thought, there's no way, dude, I am not that funny. But it did make me think about, just the joy of making other people happy. And so, yes, there is like a zero limit sometimes on like if I have a barbecue or something, like I want it to be so nice for people because, first of all, I've earned that right to give gratitude to other people. And I wouldn't mind spending my money on that. That's pretty cool. And so I'm all about that. I love entertaining because I like to give to people. I want to create an experience that's memorable for the family or for yourself, or just really connecting with other people too. I love that. I mean, my job right now in this industry in mortgage land, I like to meet new people. That is how I get business as well, but it's mostly I really actually like it. So it's fun to meet new people. And it's also more fun when you get done throwing an event or something that you thought was just, you were so happy you did it. And the people like forgot what you made on the barbecue, but they're like, hey, I met this really cool girl, Heather, and her cool family. And that was the best part of my experience. I mean, that is like a win for me. So that's, I think, a lot of my intentions. Sometimes I thought about that, what are my intentions if I want to do parties or like, have customer appreciation events. And really, I don't think it's there's any ill intentions there, or even like I was like, am I seeking attention? I really thought that. No, I don't. I love it. I love giving to people, and that's because that's how my father is and my family. He's super gracious. Always was like, make the pancakes for all the girls sleeping over, and make all, just so generous. And I believe that comes both ways, right? Like when you give, you're going to get back. That law of reciprocity is something that's super a big deal.
Christine, you said something that kind of jumped out at me. You talked about, you just sort of lucidly said that you wondered if entertaining was like a desire for attention. And it kind of triggered for me similar thoughts about money, right? So we didn't circle back to
Yes.
conversations about women and money. And
Yes.
so I'm just wondering if there is some correlation between the idea of wanting to entertain and connect and bring joy and fun, if there's any sort of connection between that and the way some women think and talk and have concerns about talking about money. And so I'm before I go any further, I'll pose that question to you and just ask you, like, do you think there's a correlation?
Well, I do. I mean, it's so complex, right? What we're talking about. We probably could talk about this for like 10 hours, honestly. And I think people would want to hear about it because everybody's experiencing these same things. When it comes to women and money, okay, you could go like two different ways, right? There's two avenues. One is, when you talk to somebody about how successful you are as a woman, like that's shamed upon, right? So let's say you're women in a group and nobody wants to say, oh, how much money I make, or that I'm really doing good at my job. Or you have the competition. Do you have the nicest purse? Are you driving, like some people care about that. So I think that, sometimes women can be, petty against each other of like what you're wearing and what you look like and all the things. There's that part, right? I don't tend to hang out with those people though, just so you know. That is not my crowd. But the other side is like, okay, is it hard for us to both say to each other, hey, Heather, you know what? You're a badass and you've had like the most amazing jobs, and this podcast is so cool. When do we get to say that to each other? Like, why don't we say that more? Like, you did a great job, or say, hey, I'm really proud of myself. I run a really good mortgage business. That's the part that I feel like is really like complex, is like, why don't we talk more about that, especially as women to each other, of like, hey, you are really doing good at your job and you're amazing. And look at what you're doing that's wonderful for other people. And that's the part of it that I notice, is I think people don't want to talk about that. And then you have that other side of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think too, I told you this story once before, but like, when I was still in my more have not versus like have days. So this is like, really young, first like full-time real job. And I was meeting the parents of the person I was dating at the time, and they were more well off than I had grown up. And they lived in a nice big house. They drove fancy cars. Like it was very intimidating for me. And again, this is like really early in my life, but I had this sweater, and this sweater was like my purse, sort of the equivalent of the purse, right? Like it was something that was of a brand that people would know cost, a certain amount. And so this sweater became like my obsession as part of this first like meeting of these parents and siblings and etc. And I mean, I look back now and I cringe, like the fact that like I was so sort of absorbed in my sweater, but I needed, at the time I was feeling so insecure, and
Mm-hmm.
this sweater was the only social signaling I had, or felt like I had, to say, I'm good enough to be here with you. I'm not less than you because I have this sweater. I mean, like, it sounds so silly to say now, but I mean, we're all doing that at some degree, at some point in our life, in certain environments, under certain sets of circumstances. And maybe it's not a physical object, maybe it's a title, or maybe it's a certain company that we work for, or maybe it's the car we drive, or the school that our kids go to. Like, there is social signaling happening all of the time, and it would be like inappropriate to deny its importance,
Mm-hmm.
because the reality is that, like, even this podcast is a form of social signaling. Every professional who's ever written a book, that's a form of social signaling.
Mhm.
Our content on our LinkedIn profiles is a form of social signaling. So we're all trying to communicate something in different ways, shapes, and forms. But I also like understand that there are certain times where we, in my situation, in the story I just told, I look back now and I'm so embarrassed. I feel a certain amount of shame. And it's so on the one hand, it's like, well, why? Why do I feel shame? Like I was in an environment where I felt like I needed to social signal, and the sweater was what I had to go off of, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm at a point in my life now where I'm like, that seems so desperate, like the level of desperation that involves. And so, I mean, for what it's worth, Christine, I'm just trying to get to the fact that, like, all of us struggle, men, women, non-binary, it doesn't matter. We're all struggling to communicate things about ourselves, like outwardly to the world. But I think for women in particular, we're not encouraged to talk about our salaries.
Mhm.
I know that there's a push in a lot of states for things like salary transparency. And as someone who's worked in leadership, right, I've been able to get behind the scenes and see some of like how some of those things are benchmarks are set and how the research is done. And I sort of have some understanding to how compensation is set, while at the same time telling you that through that process, I realized at one point in my career, I was being underpaid probably by $30,000 a year.
Ugh. Yeah.
And so, but how do you know? How do you know, right, that you are not being paid what you're worth or being treated the way you should if we don't talk about it? And so it's such an interesting, it's money again is one of those taboo things, right? People always said at the table, don't talk about money, don't talk about religion
Mhm.
and or politics. I guess politics, money, and religion are off the table. And it's at this weird place now, I think, and I feel this as I'm navigating conversations with other entrepreneurs, people in career development. Like it's money is still a taboo topic. I mean, how many videos are there or blogs are out there about how to negotiate your salary?
Mhm.
Because we all still feel really uncomfortable when it comes to talking about money. And I think that's especially hard for women. I don't know, like if you have
Yes.
a take or
Oh,
perspective
I
on
think
this.
I mean, you hit the nail on the head 100 times on that. I agree with every single thing you said, honestly. It's, I remember once, this, I'll never forget this. I had a friend who, my best friend, Leslie, and one time she used to work for Bob's Red Mill, and she was a badass, and she made a lot of money. Okay. And I remember one time we're having dinner and we're talking, and we were like, she's like, how much money do you make? Like, can we talk about that? Are we friends? Like, are we allowed to? And, like, look at us little tiptoeing around when it's just the two of us even talking. So I think I don't know if that's ever going to change. I mean, it's always going to be hard. I think what I propose to myself, or the way I've been trying to handle myself is, if I see somebody that's trying to have the nice purse or the nice sweater or something, it's like I just have compassion for them for whatever they feel. And like, to me, it doesn't matter. I look at them as a person, I really do, instead of just whatever they're personally wearing and stuff. But that's just, I think you have to work. I have worked towards that personally. I don't want to have judgments because I don't want to be judged for anything. So I'm trying to put out what I want to get back. But money is like so hard to discuss because there is, I mean, I am driving a nice car right now, but I also worked my ass off for that. And is it okay for me to say that? I I just feel like it's terribly difficult conversation for women to have. And I want to have it. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I might not know everything, but all these feelings that come up when you talk about it, it's like it is so complex to get in there, and just all the navigation of, do I have money? What's it going to get me? And right now, where I'm at is I'm just trying to give. That's really what I want to do. And I love to party. So let's combine the two things together and, try and do some stuff and meet some people and have a good time. But I think this is an awesome conversation. I can't tell you how honored I am to talk to you about this, because I really like what you've had to say, honestly.
Well, and it sounds to me, Christine, like what you just said, you're like, look, I work hard, I make money, I want to spend that money on having fun, making connections. And so what I really hear from you in that is that you're now at a place where you're really trying to align your resources with your values.
Mhm.
And I also hear someone who is probably, and I'm making an assumption here, but probably prioritizing spending on experiences over things. But I mean, clearly no judgment if you'd rather spend your money on things. I like art, and I'm not saying I have some great collection of like original art, but I do occasionally buy original pieces for my home. And so, I mean, that is me spending my money. Like, to me, the value of something aesthetically pleasing, beautiful, like someone's artistry, that is aligned with my values, right? And so, even though it's an object, it's something that when I do spend money on it, I don't usually have any I don't have any like guilt
Mhm.
over spending my money on art. I might, however, have guilt about spending money on an overpriced piece of clothing or something, you know? So it's just like the clothing, I like clothes, I like purses, I like all the things we're talking about, but those aren't necessarily aligned with my values. And so, you know, if I overspend on something that doesn't align, then sometimes I do have guilt
Mhm.
or shame or, feelings that don't feel good about the ways I've used my money.
Mhm.
But I never feel bad about going on vacation, you know, having experiences. I never feel bad about buying art. And it sounds like you don't have any sort of remorse about celebrating and partying and entertaining and all of the things that you like to do for fun.
Yes, that's probably true. However, I always try and balance that out by giving to charity. So I like to do that at the end of the year. I try and find some really good charities and try and do some. I would really like to do a charity event because I would like to balance that out. But yeah, I do. I would not have any remorse spending, like, for example, Halloween. I do. If you know me out there, you know I love Halloween. And once a year I buy one big cool thing for like $150 to add to my Halloween collection. You know, I know there's, people who really work hard and don't have money, but that's one thing that I have earmarked for myself, that I, work all these hours, and I, try and put in, my time giving back to society, that I want to buy a Halloween thing. If I make myself feel bad about it, I could do that, right? But I try, be like, okay, I'm intentionally buying this object right now for myself. It makes me happy. It brings me joy. I love Halloween and I love scaring people. Come on, that's so fun. So if I'm going to do that, I'm not going to shame myself, and I'm just going to be like, I'm going to go for it. It's like eating a good piece of pizza. I mean, you're not going to shame yourself after you eat it. You'll be like, I love that pizza. I ate that intentionally.
Well, I think that's the key word, right, Christine, is intentionality. And I think that, while there are certain aspects of both of our lives currently that are an aspect of privilege, right? Like we've earned a certain level of privilege because we've done certain things, and it's
Right.
probably a good combination of like luck and perseverance and determination and all of the things. But I mean, I think no matter what your circumstances are, the key to this, to an aspect of this conversation, is intentionality, right? And I have seen, you know, unfortunately, I wasn't always modeled the best like money habits. And I think that was partially because there wasn't always a focus on intentionality, right? It was sort of the oscillation, which unfortunately I have carried into my life at times, but that oscillation between like, I deserve this and I can't afford this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you get to a point, I think, where money stops having when money can stop having that level of control over you. And I don't know, because my only experience to sort of break the cycle was the halves, right? To getting to the point where I had that kind of money. But I have to assume that there are some people who have managed to break the cycle and maybe are still living on a more modest income. And so I do think there is an aspect of intentionality in how we think about money, how we leverage money as a resource, how we use our money, how we treat ourselves with our money, all of those things. So I don't know. I think it's the intentionality is key.
I agree with that. And I also think that if we can all do the best we can to not let our careers or money define us as a human, like we talked about earlier, being like, feeling like I have no identity left because I quit my job. Because I was too stressed out. Like if we take all of that away for our own selves individually, person by person, then maybe there could be some, less judgment there. But that's, when I think about my job and I think about what do I do, I don't think about just giving out a mortgage. I really do feel like I want to create a good experience and like an education piece and really, go at it that way instead of being like, okay, this is my career, this is what I am, and this is all my identity is. It's really not true, and money shouldn't really define you. And if we kind of look at everybody that way, I feel like that works, or that's what I'm trying to do. And so those are the humans in my life I want to spend time with and connect with. So.
Well, Christine, we are getting near the end of the show, and I love to wrap each episode by saying, if someone said this show is way too long, I did not listen. What is like one thing you'd want them to take away from our conversation?
I would say if you are yelling at the bank manager, you probably should be nice instead, because you might get your fees waived. That would be number one. No, really that, Heather, you're awesome, and this was amazing. And the conversation about money should continue to go on, and talking about how it makes us feel and how it changes our lives and all the things is really important. And I hope that we can continue that conversation. I hope the listeners got some really fun bits out of this. And yeah, we talked for a long time, which was super cool.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you taking time. I know how busy your schedule is, so thank you so much for spending some time with me.
Yes, it was my pleasure.
If you enjoyed this episode and are seeking to redefine success on your own terms, subscribe to Small Acts of Rebellion and join a community that celebrates authenticity and personal growth.